Hello there, I'm David Bradley, aka Schizophreniforms, and this is Reality is a Hallucination Part 2. I've entitled this Living the Dream, which I think is rather apt, because what I'm going to be discussing is the actualization of what it's like to exist under the revelation of everything that I discussed in the previous video. So stick around to find out more. So in the previous video, I discussed quite, I think relatively articulately, the difference between, well, I basically alluded to like these ever increasingly lucid states that I hadn't used in that previous video, but I refer to it as lucid waking. And it's an interesting way of looking at it because it doesn't create a degree of inference about higher, lower, greater, lesser, accurate, not accurate. It's a way of approaching reality in a similar way to which like psychoanalysts approach dream analysis. So I've talked about this in other videos on other channels in other ways, but this is really hard to articulate. But my experience of reality when years and years and years ago unmedicated, and when my meds were off, and lately as I'm trying to reintegrate certain parts of my perception to attain a kind of holistic wholeness, I feel like it's been useful to return to the notion that I originally had before, which was that fundamentally there are two, not always opposing but commonly opposing ways of looking at reality, and one of them is to see reality, the one I'm going to express is to see reality as though that it is fundamentally allegorical, fundamentally metaphorical, fundamentally communicative, that reality itself is communicative, and that can be in a whole bunch of different ways. It's most common, you might call it serendipity, you might call it Jungian synchronicity, and it takes a careful tongue, a careful mind, a careful degree of sensitivity to be able to articulate it. But there's this wonderful phrase that I've used a lot in private conversations with people that I borrowed from Jordan Peterson. For whatever you may think of him, I got this from this exact wording from him. It's like he was describing, like, sincerely heartfelt, in tears, like almost like the moments that have proved to him, because he's Christian, right? I don't necessarily too strongly ascribe myself as Christian, but the idea that like the moments when the objective world and the narrative world overlap, and there's this sense of absolute like synchronicity, perfection, divinity, unity with God, and this is kind of, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but that is kind of what I want to talk about. Is like there has been a lot of, like, I've had not necessarily just holy experiences with this as well, as you may know if you watch some. I've had deeply unholy experiences of this, like dark synchronicity as well. But that the way he put it was just beautiful. It's like there's this sense of, again paraphrasing, there's this sense that you're just in the right place at the right time, and it makes complete sense. Like you're imagining of the world, or like your deep background narrative that's going on in your psychology, and we'll come to that in a bit because that's really important, comes to the forefront and aligns with the objective world. So that's what I'm driving at in a nutshell, and I'm going to go into that. And so, as I mentioned, the light and dark synchronicities and so on and so forth, like I've mentioned in previous videos, like being deeply troubled in the past and experiencing not just good and bad, but like the whole pantheon, or like even a degree down from that. So like kind of a Hindu pantheon of this, like Brahma being the ultimate infinite emanation of God at the top, down to this schmuck here talking to you on camera that's schizophrenic, that thinks he's enlightened. So let me gather my thoughts and I'll be back. So a little preface for anyone that might not know about synchronicity, Jungian synchronicity. It's I'll give my version of it in a minute, but as far as I gather it, the rough gist is like, it's the definition is like when you have an experience of objective reality that has some deep, just for you almost, or it can be collective, but generally just one person, like profound, deep meaning that seems as though fate or coincidence or the universe itself has aligned to create that occurrence specifically for you. Now, I didn't come up with this. I discovered it independently and then found through research and hashing over years of confused, baffling, strange situations that it had a name, and it was come up with by a psychoanalyst called Carl Jung, who also purportedly descended into madness. So who knows? But he was an incredible visionary psychologist. I guess you would call him that. But yeah, that's the definition. So to me, to elaborate on that, I was sort of talking in the previous section about like you've got Brahma, or like I think Brahma or Brahman. Yeah, Brahman is, or whichever one it is, Brahma or Brahman, is like Yahweh. It's like the Godhead, or like the infinite light of like God itself, and then it delineates down, and you've got the Trimurti. I've got a picture, I can't take it down, but I've got a picture of all my favourite deities here. We are in my shrine, so I am religious. Do what you will with that information. But like, it's analogous like to the delineation of consciousness down from like the level of, I don't know, you could put Brahma at the level of the planet, or you could put Brahma at the level of the universe, but like I'd say probably the planet. I don't know though. I can't grasp the depths of my own ignorance in that regard. But hypothetically, let's say Brahma was the consciousness of the planet, and then it delineates down into these concentrically individualistic structures. Alan Watts talks a bit about this, and it's like it's the way things have been structured in human religion since time immemorial. It's like so it comes all the way down, and then some people believe that like humans is like an apex point, and then that delineates down into other creatures. I don't know what I make of that, because I'm an animist in experience rather than belief. I'm an animist in that like from infinite consciousness. So if we took back to the level of the universe, from like infinite consciousness of the universe as like was like from the Big Bang expanded ever out as like one conscious entity, like a biocentrically evolving conscious infinite sphere of information and consciousness. That's a lot of people perhaps not like that, but I've heard that explanation as well. Whatever point you start the chain, like it comes down to like, so for example, I have an individual consciousness. I have there is something that it is like to be me on my own individually as an individual consciousness. But then like introduce another person there, they have their own individual consciousness. But the very confrontation between the souls, or the consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, the spirit of those two people, generates in both psyches. This is the level of the human. Generates in both psyches like I talked about this in my most popular video, Telepathy Thought Broadcasting on Confirmation Bias. It generates like a third, or like an auxiliary, like conglomerate consciousness between the two, or whatever degree of people are together, they create like collective consciousness, not unconsciousness, collective consciousness. So you might, if I'll slow down a bit, I've had a lot of coffee, to imagine or comprehend what I'm saying. When you talk to someone, your personality at like a substructural, subconscious level adapts to their presence, and vice versa. And it consciously, you can be aware that you're adapting your personality. You might use certain language, you might use certain triggers, you might use certain facial behaviors, it might generate an exact specific certain feeling. And for me, it goes down into deeper substrata of like an energetic quality that leaves like an emotional resonance. So, you know, it's not just like when you come together with this person in time, and then you interact, and then you have this temporary uniting of forces, and then you go back unchanged. It's like some part of you is written onto each other at like a kind of resonant level that, like, it's hard to explain it just as a dialogue, but like a resonant level that in some small way fundamentally changes your personality permanently. And that, but to further allude down this path, like that everything is like that, like that like, right, so I use the example of the pencil, like saying a pencil isn't conscious, no, but there is like the experience you're having, and this is a bit baffling to explain because I don't quite know how to articulate it, but like of this with my instrument, I'm a musician, like that there is a voice that my bass contains, that when me and the bass are combined creates this, it becomes my vocal cords. And that's a bit grandiose, but like I deeply experience that. Like each instrument has its own soul, its own voice, its own tonal qualities that each individual player brings out. And then not to mention all the psychological associations, the delicate wear of the fretboard, the delicate like adjustments of the dials, of like the craftsmanship that went into it originally, and then the way the instrument is just absolutely devastatingly slightly altered by the way that each individual person plays it, crafts this like analogous to the soul that instrument has. Like, so to say that a pencil might have consciousness, I'm not assuming that there is a thing. I'm not assuming that there is a thing that is that in this pencil that is individually conscious. I'm going way beyond that assertion, and I'm saying that like in the previous video where I'm explaining how like we don't know what the limits of our how limited our perceptions are. Like, it's not that the pencil is individually consciousness, it's that the fabric of existence that we see through our limited filters is consciousness itself. Right, I need to gather my thoughts because that was extremely specific. Okay, so to try and unpack everything I just said, it's not that I believe that the pencil has an equatable consciousness to a human being. I believe that the materia, the substance, the substrate in which I'm having this experience, in which you're having this experience, it's as though reality itself is consciousness, right? And the degree to which you like can separate, like, oh well, I have the prefrontal cortex, therefore I'm more part of consciousness than chimp, and then the chimp has a higher mammalian brain, so it's more conscious than a lizard, and it's painfully reductive in such a sense that like cognitive faculty can be expressed that way. But like Sam Harris's wife wrote a book about this, and she had this wonderful talk with Tom Bilyeu where it was like where we think consciousness consciousness stops is oddly convenient to like what we want to subject animals to. Is oddly convenient to like us as so we're an apex predator, but we're not like the highest form or the highest expression of consciousness on the planet, and we're pretty soon to be surpassed as that by AI. So that's a deeply deeply human, deeply arrogant statement to assume that we're the pinnacle of consciousness. We know our brains are the most complex brains biological brains we've ever experienced. That's measurable. But the degree to which there's no reason to assume that like a cow has less cognitive faculty than a human, therefore is less conscious. Like that doesn't track. And it's like the thing Sam Harris's wife, I can't remember her name, bless. The spectrum to which consciousness becomes proto-consciousness, and the degree to which the higher cognitive faculty, I'm using someone else's term there, but like the faculty of the human brain is an expression of consciousness. But like the idea that scale goes down as far as, I don't know, a chicken. Like, is a chicken worthy of that? Is an ant like simply a biological robot? It's like and you can reflect that sentiment back up the scale. It's like, if you really want to be like dangerously materialistic, you can say that humans are just biological robots with no consciousness, and even the idea that we are having an aware experience is an illusion of our biology. And it's like, you only have to experience reality to know that like there is something deeply real that it is like to be awareness or aware, or to have consciousness. And you know that because when it's gone, you cease to exist. Reality ceases to exist. You cease to exist. And it's like, I'm making some leaps here that aren't quite as articulate as I would have liked. But I'm just prefacing heavily, that's what I experience. That's the way I think about it. And with the previous video, I would highly recommend, it's probably in the cards in one of these two positions. Go and watch that if you've got this far in and are a bit baffled, because there's like all the bolstering and the logic and the information you might need might be in there. But animism, yeah, that was the so simultaneously I'm in the state of like it's not that I have consciousness or that animals have. It's not. It's as though the base materia of which reality is composed is consciousness. And back to the other video, that completely is a conclusion I've drawn to some degree, and a lot of people do draw that conclusion based on the idea expressed in the previous video. So I'll be back. So, a bit of calm has been achieved. The honest things that I wanted to talk about are connecting to other dimensions, connecting to spirits and non-physical entities, God and the Godhead, communing with nature, what have I written? Interacting with the weather, non-physical, how do I put it? Non-seemingly conscious aspects of reality. And animism I covered, and then miracles and serendipity. So what I've been finding as I explore and remembering more of my like initial psychosis is that there are ways in which you can attune to reality that give more synchronous psychospiritual feedback, or like serendipitous feedback, than others. Like there is it's delicate to talk about because obviously I'm labelled as schizophrenic, but on the other hand it's like I'm labelled as schizophrenic, so I might as well be honest about it. That's what I told myself to say that in my notes. So other dimensions. I don't mean other dimensions as like there is this aspect of it, but I don't mean other dimensions as in there is like something outside of our reality that I am able to go to and then return with information. We discussed that in the lucid dreaming section of the last video. That like totally different reality, that's a factor in my experience. It is, regardless of whether you think that's valid or real. That's something I've experienced, so I can say with some certainty that will come up in the video shortly. But what I'm talking about at this level is like different kind of states of cognition that fundamentally change your experience of reality. So I moved outside the garden because I believe someone was sniggering at me while I was talking, which didn't really help my flow. I wanted to, so this video is entitled Part 2, Living the Dream. So the whole gist of it is like what the implications are of living with this, the implications of living with the state of what it's like to be embody like the idea that all of reality is a hallucination. So I was going to start talking about dimensions. So I'm like there is the experience as discussed in the dream state of the last video, which it's probably up here somewhere. I recommend watching it. If not, it'll be in the link in the description. There are I've experienced other dimensions of existence, and I said that quite clearly, honestly. But that's not quite what I'm talking about in the waking state. In the waking state, there is a bit like the samsara nirvana paradigm. The like there is samsara, which is the waking state before liberation. Then there is the same reality, but with the new state of consciousness. And in that regard, like, oh, the sun just came up beautifully. I hope you'll pick that up on camera. That was lovely. We'll get to the weather interactions and the nature and stuff, because that's where this animism, as previously discussed, really comes into play. But for now, when I say in this section talking about connecting to other dimensions, I'm talking about like a kind of altered state of consciousness, a different, like as quite trite cliche thing the hippies would say, but there's probably some merit to it in some regard, otherwise it wouldn't be such a pernicious idea. The idea that like you can tune the frequency of your brain to a very specific perceptual realm. Like I think there's definitely some credence in that argument. Like you can fundamentally alter your perceptions by what frequency your brain is attuned to. And if you don't believe me, take any psychedelic, measure your brain response. Like there's been so many studies on this. You have fundamentally different, at some level, fundamentally different experience of reality based on the brainwave function. So I'm just sort of preface that. So the way I perceive these things and the way I think about it, even just regardless of psychedelics, like that there are like different resonant, parallel and contiguous realities that exist within and in totality within the external to and within the normal waking state of consciousness. And that, like, it is my experience through being schizophrenic, or my awakening experiences, whatever you might think of it, I don't know at this stage, but it is my experience that you can develop a relationship with these other states as though they're beings, as though the consciousness of reality can can be communicative. I think I said this in the previous section. And being out in nature is a perfect way to do that, because you can attune yourself to a certain degree. Like, it's quite common for people to go out in nature, feel this kind of rejuvenating effect of the plants, this kind of resetting, like the greens, even just the colour green creates this vibrant, living, peaceful, deeper sense of something. And then, I love how the wind just perfectly stops. I don't know if that's picking up on the camera, but we'll come to that in a bit. That's quite an interesting one. It is my experience with the idea that the universe itself is entirely one infinitely large consciousness, that comes all the way down from like the infinite annihilation of self Godhead, right the way down to, I think I said earlier, this schizophrenic schmuck sat here explaining to you why he's so enlightened. Do you know what I mean? So like, there is, people all the time talk about having a relationship with God, and it's like the way in which God answers questions, or what I think of as God, which is one of a multiform pantheon of spirits, is like through serendipity, through synchronicity, through the overlapping of the objective and narrative worlds, where they come into phase, and you get that kind of Rupert Spiro described like non-dual tantra, and I can't remember which monk it was, but like he was reading some beautiful passages in this video where he's talking about you go into such a state of meditation on such a regular basis that meditation becomes your permanent state of consciousness. Like, prayer becomes your entire thought process is prayer. And I don't know whether I've quite attained that yet, but it's definitely my, like, something that's burgeoning once again in my psyche for the better, like the serendipitous response, and it's, people talk about connecting with spirits and gods and deities in general, especially like Yahweh in the Christian mythology, as an act of submitting. It's not like you go, the wind will blow, and then it goes blow, because it doesn't. It's like you submit to reality, and you start to pick up psycho-spiritual feedback based on like your relationship to that thing. This probably all sounds like nonsense, to be honest. Sometimes it does when I think that. But I have had some purely anecdotal experiences, because I can't demonstrate it, but purely anecdotal experiences where, for example, I was conversing with a loved one recently and saying like it could so easily be heaven, and then at that exact moment the last dregs of clouds that were obscuring the sun moved, and it like lit up the whole garden in this deep powerful sun ray that like gave us both halos and stuff, and was just magical, and it was deeply significant. But to hear that and to experience it, like, you wouldn't, to describe that would be to devalue the experience so distinctly as to make it unbelievable, you know. But if you had that exact serendipitous moment, you might have experienced it. I had another one a number of years ago. I was on the beach with a friend of mine, and I was saying like I'm in this kind of bizarre state. This was before I'd really fully come out of the darkest parts of my psyche, and I said, the exact words were, I just feel like I need to wake up. And then huge like fireworks, it turns out, just erupted at that exact second from like out at sea behind us. Like, this fireworks show began the first explosion at the moment I said I just feel like I need to wake up, and it was like for me and that guy, as far as I gather, because that's the impression I got. Like, that was a hugely serendipitous, significant, synchronous moment that lasted both of us a long time, and it raised a lot of questions and incited a deep amount of curiosity and reverence for the idea that coincidence and serendipity and synchronicity could be something that could, for me at least, it could be something that could be interacted with. And I've spent a number of years repressing the medication, basically medication, denial, and non-exploration, and like serious like blocks in my psyche that prevented me from being in anything resembling a healthy state. That, like, still medicated, to be fair, I've been able to unpick some of these knots and start to find serendipity wherever it is. So, like, in my mind, they're all like cheering now. It's quite beautiful, but that's just for me. Like, you know, I mean, the sudden increase in birdsong it just seemed significant, and it doesn't have to be objectively real for it to be deeply meaningful for the person. So that's the long speech, so I'll be back with some more. I'll give you another little anecdotal reference of just weird synchronous moments. I went to a place called Barkham Mill, and they have rowing boats there, and they have like just an absolute ton of dragonflies there. And I was with my partner and my son and my partner's brother, and I was talking to the dragonflies in playful, semi like curious way, calling them fairies, and that was quite interesting. And this is where we get like woo alert, hippie alert. But yeah, it was interesting because I found this with insects and birds and plants and not plants but animals, and even the wind. Like, there's this sense that the degree to which you consider something could be conscious, then there's a lot of room for logical fallacies here. But like, if you imagine back to what I was saying earlier, that the expression of the universe as consciousness is reality itself, as though like the substrate of reality is consciousness itself, and then everything that happens is like allegorical. I don't know if that bit got kept in the footage, but it's very much as though like the degree to which you're willing to acknowledge that part of you, like even now, like I'm talking to a camera telling this story, and it's like I'm having to separate myself from that experience to be able to describe it, but I'm still getting the experience that like things are happening allegorically in my consciousness. Now, the interesting part about that is you don't have to be schizophrenic, you don't have to be psychotic, you don't have to be on drugs. Like, coincidence cascades as soon as you're attentive to it, and it's not like, oh, red cars are significant and then you see red cars everywhere. That's like a really crude example. It's like the reason red cars became significant draws your attention to red. Like it's almost ignorant to think about it that way, to me, because everything functions like I believe, I could be mistaken in this, but I believe everyone's psyche is telling a story, and the degree to which you're telling the story that coincidence is irrelevant directly creates an allegorical response to that. It's almost like your prayer that nothing is happening makes nothing happen. It's hard to explain, but then the inverse of that is also the case. It's like you can kind of interact with reality in such a way that it becomes an immediate fulfillment of prayer if you're able to tune into the exact part of the consciousness of reality, the exact spirit that you're trying to commune with. Didn't say it would be logical, I'm just telling you what it's like. So the degree to which you are able to follow the train of thinking that I'm having, like what I'm fundamentally driving at is that like the belief system, it's been described that like the universe is happening, or like reality is the better word for me. This reality is happening for you, not to you. Like that kind of hippie trite statement, but it's probably more accurate than people realise. Like the degree to which your gratitude, your suspension of disbelief, your ability to tune in to your environment, the degree to which you can suspend what are fundamentally are presuppositions about reality. Like coincidences aren't significant. Like reality is material, it's substance, it's factual, it's science, it's rock and stone. It's hard to articulate, but it's like the degree to which people create this barrier to these experiences, not by not believing in anything, but by believing that by having an anti-belief that like those things don't happen, and like that it's debilitating in terms of spiritual growth sometimes, I think, for people. Like the idea that everyone knows that coincidence isn't real, and also the idea that there's no such thing as coincidence. That's kind of what I'm saying to a certain degree, and like you can focus in and out of how much you go with that. And this is what I was mentioning earlier about the dark and light synchronicities and the different like dimensions or different spirits you can interact with. It's as though, and I have talked about this quite candidly in other videos, like the degree in which you can let the universe in and project the universe out is predeterminative of like your relationship to reality. And I don't think I can explain it rationally at the moment. But it's not really a rational process. It's like, for better or worse, even when I thought I was in hell, like reality was still allegorical in that state. And in fact, I have to like chemically lobotomize myself and like reduce my emotional bandwidth and reduce all neurotransmitters that the brain uses into a very small bandwidth to block that out, and it still doesn't block it out. It's like that's the primary motivator of why I'm kind of exploring it, really, is because like the drugs don't work. Like they can make life easier, they make life more tolerable, they make it less extreme, they help me control my emotions. All those things are good, but the fundamental goal of antipsychotics, at least originally, was to kill the symptoms. I guess that would be the point, right? Because otherwise, if you weren't trying to get rid of the symptoms that were problematic so as to be curative of the illness, like you're just shutting people up to a certain degree, and that's cool. Like I get that. Like I have met and observed many people with the diagnosis of schizophrenia that are deeply troubled, deeply out of line perceptually with reality in a way that is irreconcilable. And that's why I always say I'm so lucky that my schizophrenic experiences, as they're labelled, are deeply religious and otherworldly and supernatural, because if they weren't, I don't think there's ever really been a time when they weren't supernatural. I might not be able to be this articulate and rational despite the fucking bizarre range of demons and angels and spirits, and like literally, like, so less than 2 weeks ago, I had a giant metamorphic tentacled eyeball that like had like completely visible, as though it was literally there in the room with only a very thin layer of like insubstantiality, so I could see through it a little bit, but like it was like this big, like this giant eyeball with tentacles and teeth. And like after 35 years of this, like first thing I did was visualize a very long, very sharp knife and insert it into their dimension of existence and rip it in two. And then the end of the dialogue, I'm not proud of that. Like, it's just like, it's a useful skill. Like, I'm just so unfazed by being visited by like these otherworldly entities that like, it's just like, all right, okay. So another one, like I conjured lightning down to kill this like squid-like thing that was trying to take my soul, and all. I've just had so many visions of horrible things that it just doesn't scare me. And I've trained my visualization deeply for years and years and years, and it's like, kind of like, if you are schizophrenic and suffering from these like horrible visions, because mine literally aren't always horrible. In fact, the majority of my hallucinations are like heart-wrenchingly beautiful and so cherished that I wouldn't share them, I feel. But the most useful thing you can learn to do as someone suffering under malevolent and dark spirits, aka dark hallucinations, is to learn to visualize, so that like I can borderline feel the blade I'm conjuring in my hand. Do you know what I mean? My visualization is that good, and in the hallucinatory space where these visions happen, I can interact with them, but they can't interact with me, and it's fascinating. And these like darker beings, these like elemental creatures, don't seem to have as much ability to animate reality as, say, like the thing I was referring to earlier about submitting to, those more powerful, not necessarily higher or lower, but those more like beautiful, serendipitous, protective, angelic forces seem to have more ability to nudge reality in your favor, and that is directly related to how much of a relationship you have with them, and that's quite fascinating. And like, yeah, so just to close, because I think this is all I can manage today for this subject, there will be a third video, but depending on how embarrassing it is to watch this back, this may never see the light of day, who knows. But yeah, the point of this video wasn't to like brag at all in any way, or to demonstrate any miracles, which I certainly didn't, or to do any of this like bravado shit at all in any shape or form. And it's deeply humiliating to describe things like this, especially that I'm knowing that I'm going to put it on the YouTube channel. And it's my ego's taken a battering just describing it, because it makes me sound even more mad. But as the sun comes out, I can feel the heat now. That was really nice. Like, it's to try and convey some sense of what it is like, because it's, how can I put it? It's one thing to say, oh, this person's schizophrenic, their delusions are out of line with reality, therefore we should switch them off, which is always ineffectual. So that's one point. The other side of it is like the degree to which you've processed, I said this in other videos, the degree to which you've processed like your own projection out into reality determines how horrific or beautiful the state of psychosis, the state of being schizophrenic can be. Like, and what I've begun to realise is that for all that I'm battling like 10-foot wide demons, like, and for all that I've suffered a literal 6 years of thinking I was in hell, and gone through real world malevolence and deep spiritual malevolence, like once you've come through the other side and started to be able to attune with the right way of being, these experiences that it's impossible to annihilate without annihilating yourself may well at times become the most meaningful, beautiful, life-saving, awe-inspiring things that ever happened to you. I've been David Bradley, aka Schizophrenic. Peace.